All right. So this afternoon we have this wonderful panel of ladies here, and their session is on culturally responsive and relevant pedagogy. And I have the honor of introducing the three. So first up, we have Michelle G. Lee. And it's been said that in 10 minutes, Michelle can make adults feel as giddy as kindergartners, or that's what people have told her. As a computer science content specialist for the San Francisco Unified School System, her mission is to severely disrupt patterns of who believes they can be successful at computer science. To achieve this, she was the lead author of the district's kindergarten computer science curriculum, and she is currently co-authoring its upcoming pre-kindergarten curriculum. Michelle also coaches, co-teaches with, and facilitates hands-on professional development for PK through 5 classroom teachers and has introduced over 1,000 children to computer science. In 2019, CSTA and the Emphasis Foundation honored Michelle's commitment to equity at their national conferences. Next up, we have Charity Freeman. Charity is proud to be a computer science teacher and Girls Who Code facilitator at Kenwood Academy High School on Chicago's South Side. Originally from New Hampshire, Charity earned a BS in Small Business Management and Entrepreneurship and began her work in education as a high school career advisor, where she realized her desire to teach full-time. She has earned her MA in Cultural and Economic Educational Policy Studies from Loyola in May. She is a contributing member of the Computer Science Teachers Association, the Association for Computing Machinery Special Interest Group on Computer Science Education, and AERA. She has been selected as a Teach Plus Illinois K-12 Teaching Policy Fellow. And lastly, we have Shana V. White. Shana is in her 15th year of education and currently teaches at a middle school in Metro Atlanta. She has a BS in Health and Exercise Science from Wake Forest, a master's from Winthrop University, and an educational specialist in instructional technology from Kennesaw State University. She believes in purposeful disruption of the status quo in schools and is passionate about equity, race, culturally relevant pedagogy, and computer science. She's received a number of accolades, including being named a 2019 Georgia Tech Diversity and Inclusion Fellow. A 2017, she was named an EDS Scholar in the Bagwell College at Kennesaw State, and is a lead digital innovator for Georgia with PBS. So welcome, ladies, to the conference, and we're looking forward to your panel discussion. I will take myself off stage, and we'll send any questions to Shana so that she can be the moderator for this session.
All right. Michelle, I can see your screen, but I can't see like the slides.
Oh.
So Michelle, go back to screen share, and then do share from tab.
And while Michelle is doing that, I'm completely honored and humbled to be speaking with Charity and Michelle at this event. I would like to, just because of who I am and who these other fine women are as well, speak very briefly about the civil unrest and social injustice and the unfortunate and egregious death of George Floyd, as well as Breonna Taylor and Tony McDade. And I'm at a loss for words right now, just with how much is going on just in this country and how much Black lives still seem to not matter in this country. So I did want to say that just before we started, just because it's on my heart. And I hope that each of you who is participating in this session really takes a concerted effort to take your activism offline and work in spaces to make sure that you are ensuring that Black lives matter and that Black kids know that their lives matter in classroom spaces. All right. Okay, I think I see the slides. All right. So Michelle, can you go to the next slide? There we go, perfect. All right, so our agenda is basically we're going to have a couple questions that we're going to answer for you guys, and then we're going to open the floor for you guys to ask us questions. Yolanda is going to send the questions to me. And if there's questions that come up in the middle of when we're talking, she'll still send me those questions, and I might stop and answer that question rather than continue with the questions we have. Our questions are pretty open-ended, and we're going to be talking from personal experiences as it relates to culture responsive teaching, critical race theory, anti-racist pedagogy, any of those facets that we're talking about, we will be addressing during this panel. And then the closing is we'll just say goodbye, and that's about it. That's all. All right, so the first question that I wanted to pose to both Michelle and myself and Charity, and we're going to all answer these, is what is the difference between culturally relevant / responsive pedagogy? What is the difference between that and social justice and anti-bias education? Because all three of those things are completely different, but a lot of times they're conflated and people like to mix up the three. Just like we always like to mix up diversity, equity, and inclusion, and all three of those things are three separate entities. We sometimes mix up what culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy is, as well as social justice, as well as anti-bias education. So I think Charity is going to talk about culturally responsive pedagogy.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am going to be the same teacher with you all as I am in my classroom. It means that we're going to be so actively engaged, and my voice is going to be over the top and all kinds of animated, and y'all just don't have to deal with it. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So, culturally relevant versus responsive pedagogy. Michelle, can you advance to the next slide, please?
Yes.
Cool. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it, Tammy. Turn up. Hey. Alrighty, so culturally relevant pedagogy. These are both kind of titles and things that we hear kind of thrown around in the world of education. For those of you all who are on and aren't actually in the realm of education, that's perfectly fine. We'll break it down so that everybody can be on the same page. So you also have a link to the slide deck in the chat window if you all want to follow along with us as well. You can also double click the window for the slides to maximize. I know, absolutely. I got you. My name is Charity and I love sugar. Sugar Rush is my deal. Let's go. So culturally relevant pedagogy. This is typically reflective of the students and the identities and the voices that are physically present in your classroom spaces. And this typically, yes, the relevant pedagogy actually happens to include the voices of those who are also not present. So for example, I am a Black woman and proud to be one. Black lives do matter, hey now. Culturally relevant pedagogy for me is going to address the lives and the voices and the perspectives of Black people because I'm in that space. However, in other classroom spaces where they may not have students of color or teachers of color present in those spaces, that particular form of pedagogy is not culturally relevant because you cannot, if you're missing out on voices and perspectives of those individuals, those are perspectives that are not being included, not just in your curriculum, but those are also pedagogical approaches and instructional tools that you're not using because you don't have to. If you're in the space of being culturally relevant, you're making sure that that the information you're presenting is relevant to the entire culture of every person that should be represented there, even if they're not. Culturally responsive pedagogy simply addresses the voices and those who are physically present in the room. It does not diminish the identities of the people that are there, but it doesn't include those missing voices and perspectives. And so there you have it. Have any clarifying questions or anything that anybody wants to know any more about? We are here. Let us know. Who's in the chat window? Cool.
All right, I'm supposed to talk about social justice. Michelle, can you advance? Thank you. So social justice in the classroom, basically, if you're thinking about any type of curriculum, all of our curriculum should be social justice minded because we should have our children aware of their surroundings, their community, the world around them, and the injustices that are occurring in those communities, because some of those injustices will directly impact them. Some of them, they have the ability to exert power to change some of the injustice and make justice right. So with social justice teaching in a classroom, it's bringing in relevant topics that are related to that community. Maybe it's the community of learners, maybe it's the school community, maybe it's the city, maybe it's the state, maybe it's the country, and having a basically almost kind of like a roundtable, not a discussion, but a roundtable as far as like, what is this problem and how can we solve it? Something that I want to stress with social justice lessons that a lot of times people mess up with, there should never be any type of reenactments. There should never be any type of enslavement reenactments. There should never be any cotton picking reenactments. There should never be any type of debate of a person's humanity. So when we talk about trans rights, there should never be any type of debate to say, should trans people have rights or not? That's debating someone's humanity. So when we're talking about social justice lessons, we always want to make sure that we never debate anybody's humanity and we never dehumanize anybody with our discussions. And when we do that, we facilitate conversations with our kids. We allow them to investigate and explore so they can learn more about the information. And we allow them to formulate ways to solve these problems. A lot of times kids are not aware of a lot of social justice issues in their community, especially for me, I work with middle school kids. So a lot of them are oblivious. And I would give you an example for this year. I taught them about food deserts and the fact that our school is situated in a food desert, and the kids were just completely appalled. And they were like, well, why is that? And so it led to more questions, which led to more investigating and them understanding that literally a town that's 3 miles away from us is not a food desert, but our town is. And then we looked at the ethnic and racial demographics of our city compared to the demographics of that city. And it led to a lot of lively, informative discussions. So understanding social justice lessons bring in what is going on in the community, what is going on now, but also doesn't dehumanize any identities. And does not defile any identities as it relates to talking about issues of injustice or marginalization. And I'll turn over to Michelle.
Thank you so much, Shana. Thank you so much, both of you, for setting the stage for this last topic, anti-bias education. So I have to thank a woman I've been working with in the early childhood department of San Francisco Unified, Betty Pezmino, who introduced me to this concept of anti-bias education. We were writing a grant that I wanted to write a specifically anti-racist curriculum for computer science for preschoolers. Mm-hmm. And she pushed back on it and she said, you know, there's something else that people have been working on for a long time in our age group, and it's called anti-bias education. And I was like, okay, well, tell me a little bit more about that. And she said, in addition to discussing, you know, the harmful impacts of ignoring race differences in the class, it's the practice of explicitly discussing differences. So on the slide, you see directly teaching and discussing difference, including but not limited to race, class, gender, sexual orientation, ability, family structure diversity, immigration status, and culture. So I just want to elevate that this body of work that we're talking about can also be situated within a larger context of anti-bias education as well, and to give students not only the awareness, because I think there's already a lot of awareness, but the language to talk about differences, I think, is something that we can do as teachers very, very impactfully. And not only the language to discuss difference, but the language to stand up against it. And a lot of that can be modeled, again, by us as teachers. So I just wanted to just get that off my chest. And also I wanted to read a quote. So a lot of what I'm learning is coming from this book, Anti-Bias Education in the for young children and ourselves. I'll put a link to it in the chat, but it begins with this quote by Bell Hooks, and I really just wanted to elevate her voice. She's an author, a feminist, Black woman. Beloved community is formed not by the eradication of difference, but by its affirmation, by each of us claiming the identities and cultural legacies that shape who we are and how we live in the world. But this is the kicker. We deepen those bondings by connecting them with an anti-racist struggle. So we don't just stop by saying, okay, you're different than me, I'm different than you, but we're going to work together towards anti-racism. So I just want to say that that as teachers, we have a really big role to play in this, and together we can do it. Yeah, I think I'll just pause right there.
Okay. So next we are going to actually talk about personal experiences as it relates to being culture responsive in the classroom. We're going to talk about our own identities and how that impacts how we navigate the classroom, and helping to make the classroom anti-racist, anti-bias, LGBTQ affirming, etc. What allyship looks like in a classroom, because a lot of times people, unfortunately, we have this big misnomer in the United States that everybody wants to get like a pat on the back and an award and a cookie for being an ally. But we have to understand that there's actually some really hard work that has to be done in order to actually be a true ally. So we're going to talk about that as well. And then we'll open up for questions from anybody else that's in the session after we have our own little stories. So I think Charities is first. Or is it Michelle's? Michelle, you're first.
I love it. I was gearing myself up to be ready. Okay. So let me move towards my next slide. Okay. Whew. So I've seen this question on Twitter often, and people ask, when's the first time you've had a Black teacher? And for me, I have to say that my answer is I have not had a Black teacher before. And the first time I had a teacher who was a person of color was in 6th grade. And that is after I had moved to Malaysia and was attending an international school. I cannot imagine if I stayed in South San Francisco, where I live right now, if that would have been different. So I just wanted to premise this first story with that knowledge that, sorry, I just need to breathe for a minute. This brings up a lot of,
Yes,
you know, a lot of process that you and I have been going through together, a lot of unlearning, a lot of learning, and a lot of, you know, really big things that come out of this. So I just want to start by saying that the first time I had this, my first non-white teacher was in 6th grade. And the thing is that she was a Chinese woman just like I was. And she was a STEM teacher. She was my science teacher. And this could have been my first time to really celebrate and see myself identified. But I have to tell you, it was the complete opposite. I felt hostility towards her. I felt that she was embarrassing, that she could have been my auntie, and that somehow there was something within myself that was not comfortable with her. And it's only now, being a 36-year-old woman, that I realized what internalized racism can look like and how that manifests in a room, and how instead of expressing solidarity with her, I'm experiencing something closer to what's called horizontal violence, which I realize is a concept from Paulo Freire and the Pedagogy of the Oppressed. But it's just seeing the people that you should be in most solidarity with as the people that are your enemies. And I just want to put out that sometimes as a woman of color, that this manifests in spaces where whiteness is the cultural norm, where it is the dominant culture. So I just want to talk about what that looks like. What does whiteness look like in a classroom? Because up until 6th grade, I didn't know what that meant, because that's all I had known in the classroom was white dominant culture. So let me get this piece of paper. So my colleague from the math department in San Francisco Unified, he's now retired, but his name is Norm Maddox. And he was the first person to introduce me to what I now know is white supremacy culture. So, oh, gosh.
Dan. Oh,
yeah.
I just want to name some of these things that we might not know could be in our classrooms. And it's a list. So number 1 is perfectionism. Second is sense of urgency. Third, defensiveness. Fourth, quantity over quality. Fifth, worship of the written word. Sixth, only one right way to do something. 7, paternalism. 8, either or thinking. 9, power hoarding. 10, fear of open conflict. 11, individualism. 12, I'm the only one. 13, progress is bigger and more. 14, objectivity. 15, right to comfort. It's in our classrooms. We see it all the time. It's the dynamics between teachers and students. It's who do you call on? It's who do you not call on? It's which lessons do you put forward? What do you think kids are interested in? That's what you think. Is that what they told you? This is something that I'm struggling with a lot. It's like, oh, I think they'll be interested in this because it has to do with games, or it has to do with music, or it has to do with this person is Black. Isn't this something that they're going to relate to? And no, it's not that simple. It's much more nuanced. And I think the process as a teacher of thinking through what your space looks like is going to take unlearning what some people think is actually being diverse or inclusive. So I just want to name a few of those things. So this is one that I think is a little bit controversial, but I believe the idea of Heritage Month celebrations, like this month, we're going to highlight the Black teacher, the Black contributors. This month is Asians. This month is Latinx. And then it disappears for the rest of the year. I feel like that does much, much more harm than actually celebrating the months.
Absolutely.
And I just think it's a form of tokenism. It's a form of curricular violence to be like, here we go. It's this special time where we're going to share some space with other people. And that people see through that really quickly, especially students. So as people who are designing lessons that come into the classroom, we have to think, how can this be a part of a larger narrative that goes through the entire year rather than just shows up for a moment as what I've learned is called tourist mentality. So I want to just, again, pause right there.
I would just like to piggyback off Michelle's brilliance and just say, we all have to understand that whiteness and white supremacy are literally central to public schools, that they were designed with white supremacy in mind. So whiteness, which means that cis, hetero, white, Christian, able-bodied, neurotypical, financially secure males, they're centralized in our schools. So any identity that takes from that, you automatically are going to be marginalized in public schools. Mm-hmm. So you have to consciously fight against the whiteness because it comes in, like I said, majority, lots of different forms, but you have to fight against it on a daily basis. I have a lot of times that people want to argue with me and say that teaching isn't political. Teaching is the most political thing that you can do.
Absolutely.
Your voice in a classroom is the most political thing you can do. People seem to confuse political and partisanship, and that's on them. As an adult, you should understand, if you are an educator in a building, that your job is inherently political. There's no discussion about it.
Absolutely.
Your decision to either decenter whiteness or to center whiteness is political.
And there is no middle ground. There's no
middle ground. It's literally a clear line. You're either over the line or you're not. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times people want to sit there and say, oh, but what about? And the whataboutisms that always tend to come up. Just understand that your job is political. And you are shaping the next generation of adults in society. So do you want society to be like it is right now? I would say right now, because I have 2 little kids of my own, I definitely don't want them growing up in a society that's like our country right this moment. Mm-hmm. And so I take that as a personal challenge every day that I go into the classroom with my students. And so, as Michelle like so eloquently said, it's whiteness is violent because white supremacy is violent. Colonization is violent. All three of these things are violent. And so they manifest themselves still in violent ways in our classrooms. And so our job is to make sure that we are political by decentering whiteness all the time, every day, every moment of the day. Because if not, kids will believe Black lives don't matter in your classroom. If not, LGBTQ kids will not feel safe in your classroom. You have to understand the moment you center whiteness, you marginalize a group. Charity, did you want to add anything?
I didn't realize there was anything more that needed to be added.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. Okay, so the next, Michelle, can you go to the next slide? There we go. Charity's going to take over about identity.
Absolutely. Somebody want to address Brandon's question, or should we wait till the end?
I'll answer it. Just go ahead, do yours.
No problem. All right, Brandon, we'll come back to you, okay? Just want to let you know. All right, so I will discuss the power and the strength of identity when it comes to the positionality of an educator in a computer science classroom. First, I will discuss what positionality is. I am a student of the sociology of education and all things educational policy. I do not want to walk into any space and use words that I'm not entirely sure that everybody knows what they mean. So just for the sake of a common understanding, I have shared a definition here. Positionality refers to your ideas, your values, your viewpoints, and also your location, your physical and geospatial location, both in time and in space. These all influence the way that you understand how the world around you operates, just the interactions, if the lens through which you can actually view. Oh, thanks for the plug, BT. The way that you actually view interactions and the way that you view people. I will pause here and just to incorporate how this kind of ties into a lot of the things that we're seeing now about implicit biases. We all have biases, okay? That's kind of the way that the human brain is designed to work. Just for the sake of efficiency, we categorize things. And it's not a conscious thing, which is why it comes down to the word implicit, which actually can also be interchangeably used with unconscious. It's not a lot of things that we typically are reflective upon unless we actively engage in the work of reflecting upon our biases, because we all have values, we all have things that, and ideologies and viewpoints and perspectives that we hold in higher esteem versus others. And as soon as we take these values and these beliefs into the classroom space, especially when we're not aware of the biases that we have, this is where the way that we enact those perspectives can have a positive or negative impact on our students. Notice that in this space, there is very little room for neutrality. Just like we say, you are either anti-bias, you're either anti-racist or you are racist. There is no non-racism, because I mean, I'm hoping that people are hearing us when we say there is no space for just inaction. There is no space for, we'll just, as I'm moving forward, and the thing that I'm going to do to make sure that I'm engaging in change is I'm going to listen. And I'm going to read and I'm going to research stuff. Like, how is that any different from what you've been doing as a teacher already? If we're going to be reflective upon this practice, we need to actually use action verbs to describe the ways that we are going to approach how our perspectives, how our views, how our thoughts, how our habits, how our upbringing, all of the things that comprise who we are as humans, we're bringing all of that into the classroom space with us. And we have to be conscious and aware and intentional about the ways that we allow all of the things that encompass our positionalities to impact our students, okay? So there is impact. It will either be positive or negative. There is no, oh, it's just there. It's not the way that it works. When we're dealing with humans, we don't have a whole lot of space for nuance, and there's a ton of nuance, but no space for, inaction. So as a Black woman in computer science education, my approach to interacting with students in a space, I've actually done both, where I've enacted culturally responsive and culturally relevant pedagogy, depending on the environment that I was in at that time, and according to the information that I knew about myself as an educator at that time. So I have actually never had a student in my classroom who identified as Indigenous or Native. And up until probably last year, that was the first time that I was actually intentional about incorporating perspectives from Indigenous people in my classroom. So for example, with the Exploring Computer Science curriculum, shout out to Joanna Good. Yeah, I'm gonna plug you in there because I love you and you're wonderful and brilliant. So she is one of the writers of the ECS curriculum. And there is a unit that she and the rest of the team, Gail Chapman, Jean Rue, everyone has contributed, and it has to do with looming. And it incorporates an idea of computational thinking and algorithms, but it does include a facet that I wasn't exactly comfortable in exploring as a teacher. And I'm like, well, we don't really have any Native students here, so technically, should I be? No, we can skip that lesson. And it wasn't until my current department manager, who's also here, I saw Dan, hey, you're great. You're weird, but you're great. And I was like, he was like, hey, actually, that would be, just because the students aren't physically represented in your space doesn't mean that they don't need to learn about other cultures. And why can't we do that through computer science? And him challenging me on that was actually the first time that and I'm not going to say that I actually felt comfortable doing it, because I also didn't have the expertise of an Indigenous or Native person in my classroom to say, is this honoring of your culture? Is this reflective of what you associate with your culture? So I didn't really have that, but I did, to the best of my ability and to the credit of the fidelity of that particular curriculum. It was actually well received by my students. But just because I don't have Indigenous people in my classroom doesn't mean that their perspective shouldn't be represented there, because you actually communicate to your students a whole lot more about what you don't say than by what you do say. And by ignoring those perspectives, by discrediting those perspectives, by neglecting and exempting those perspectives from my classroom community, that automatically makes it seem like that perspective isn't relevant and isn't necessary, which is violent toward that particular people group. Yep. I have a question. Answer the original. I don't understand.
There's one that's to you.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. I was gonna read it to you. Do you think teachers should explicitly discuss or share their teachers' positionality with their students?
I don't see why not. I do. Well, that just because it works for me doesn't mean it works for you. I'm going to tell you, I am probably one of the more transparent teachers that I've ever come across. I don't have a problem sharing much of anything about my students or about myself with my students. They respect me for it, and I think it is, in the interest of acknowledging your biases, is important to acknowledge those facets of your positionality that influence the person that you are when you're in front of them. So when I had students who were upset about the Laquan McDonald situation back in 2016, and I remember it was a Friday, and we had a conversation with my students about the Jason Van Dyke trial, because we were all very much affected and all very much nervous that that was another police officer who had killed another unarmed Black man in the city of Chicago, and he was going to get off. That was our concern. There's no way that we're going to have any kind of a conversation about computer science content in that moment, because we are all being affected by another aspect of our identities that has nothing to do with my identity as a teacher or their identity as a student. And there's no way that we can ignore that in that moment. So yes, I think it is important for me to share and discuss that. I've also had conversations with my students where I let them know I don't have a whole lot of white female friends, just based on interactions that I've had with white women in the past. That is a bias for me. It is something I'm working on. At this point, I think I have 3, 2.5. There's one I'm not really sure of. But Jessica Kibble White is here. She can attest that she is one of my white female friends. And I actually like and genuinely love her like a sister. I'm growing in that area. And I very much, and my students get it, like, because, oh, I love you too, and I mean it. And like, because there are so many different things that impact me in ways that have nothing to do on the outside with my identity as an educator, but that does influence my identity as an educator because that approaches
Right.
how I deal with my white female students.
Right.
I'm going to be real about that. And my students get that because I also share with them the other side of it. Thank you, Nikiva. That's my best friend. She knows I'm growing because my new white friends movement just started in 2020 and she's been with me every step of the way. Because I have to grow. And and if I am willing to embark on that journey in front of my students and let them know this is why I have a hard time with it, they know that it's also a safe space for them to grow. I have to practice growth mindset as a teacher before I can expect them to do it. These are things I have to model for them. So yes, that is important for me to be able to model and to share and to be transparent about in my classroom. Absolutely.
There's another question I think we both should answer before we move forward. And basically they were asking about parent pushback. And I think that that's quite comical because for those who don't know, I work in Georgia. I work in Gwinnett County. I saw somebody on the chat saying they were in Gwinnett County. And I just got a phone call from my principal because a parent complained about things in my Twitter feed that were siding with Black Lives Matter and that was too political for me to be voicing and that my employment in Gwinnett County can be terminated because of these political statements being made by me. Now, there has been nothing on my Twitter feed that has explicitly cussed at anybody. I mean, there's a lot of things I'd like to say to 45, but I don't. Like, there's just lots of things going on that I want to say, and I literally temper my Twitter feed because of this. This is the third time this has happened to me. And what I do is I usually lock my account. I tell the principal or the whoever the advisor is that's telling me the situation and reading me the prompt of this is what happens if you don't do when they go through the kind of law and order of the procedure. And then I continue to do what I'm doing because ultimately for me, even though I work in a right to work state, I always believe in my heart that my calling is to be a teacher and to always speak the truth. My mom, when I was a little kid, named me Sojourner Truth because every time I went somewhere, people were always listening to what I had to say. And that's not to give myself a pat on the back, but it's to say that I always speak the truth and people are gravitate towards that. And so I will just say personally with parent pushback, I have received very little. It's usually a parent that's not in my district or not in my school. This parent was not in my school or in my cluster. They're in the North Gwinnett cluster, and they happen to see my Twitter feed and called the area superintendent to get me reported. So for me, I don't normally have parent pushback because my kids in my class, they feel like it's a community. They love being in my class. They feel like I'm like a big sister in the sense of I'm open to listening to them. I want them to share their stories. I want them to feel safe at all times in my classroom. And so they never feel the need to go home and tell mommy and daddy, oh, so-and-so Miss White said this, because everything that I do in my classroom, that affirms everybody's identity. I'm never going to marginalize somebody's identity in my classroom. I'm never going to make somebody's identity feel unsafe in my classroom. Even if other students engage in behavior, I make sure I nip that in the bud. We had an issue earlier this year that I'll talk about when I get to mine. But basically, I make sure that nobody's identity feels marginalized or unsafe in my classroom. And when you do that, kids don't need to go tell their parents. If they feel comfortable in your classroom, there's nothing to go tell their parents about. So that would be my answer as far as the parent pushback, because I'm dealing with it right now and I always will deal with it. And I've just accepted the fact that when you speak the truth, sometimes people just don't like it and they just have to get over it.
Absolutely. I have been fortunate up until this point, this table's made of wood, that I have not had concern or haven't received a lot of parent pushback. The closest thing I got to parent pushback was during parent-teacher conferences this year. One of the parents of my students casually mentioned the instructional time that was lost due to the Chicago Teachers Union strike. I almost came my bag on him. Gratefully, we were on the phone, so he couldn't see my facial expression. But that's literally the closest thing I've had to parent pushback. But even in response to that situation, I had to remind him, like, your baby girl is taken care of. She has every resource that she needs at our current school. I'm at Lane Tech College Prep in Chicago on the north side. And I hope that some of y'all who may not even be from the city know how intrinsically segregated by race and by socioeconomic status the city of Chicago is. So to be able to attend that school is we are the number one public high school in, I would like to say, the state, because I love my school that much, but at least in the Chicago Public School District. So just the access to resources that students have is not so much a thing there. However, when I worked at Kenwood, when I was at Ogden International School of Chicago, that was a legitimate concern. We would have students who would go home, and I know for a fact that they weren't getting 3 square meals a day. As students, I kept fruit snacks and granola bars in my classroom because I expect the kids to come to school hungry the next morning. So I get that in one school, the strike might have seemed like a waste of time because y'all have 1 million nurses, and we have librarians, and we have counselors, and we have access to everything that we need here. I didn't go on strike for Lane Tech. I went on strike for CPS because the experience that my students have at one school should be consistently the experience that every student in the district should have. Because it's not like any other student at any other school is any less deserving of those resources. They just don't have them, which is a problem, which is why I went on strike. So when I explained this to the parent, it was, oh yeah, I understand that. You're right. We have to do the right thing and da-da-da. He dialed it back big time. But I don't mind teaching grown people too. So if people decide that they want to question the reason why I do what I do, I'm an extraordinarily intentional and strategic human being, just as generally across the board. I don't do stuff for no reason, especially when it comes to my students. My students don't snitch on me. And I've told them if they want to, they're more than welcome to, but they don't have any reason to. I haven't given them any reason after telling me that. The majority of the pushback I get from my students is, Ms. Freeman, you taking too long to put my grades in. Because I'm slow when it comes to grading. But I would definitely echo Shana's priority of making sure that your classroom space is a safe space and even a brave space for your students to be able to come forward and say, this is how I feel, this is what I'm experiencing, this is what I'm confused about. And a lot of the conversations that we have nothing to do with CS content, which is how I know that the impact that I'm making is affecting them in ways that will lead far beyond our classroom.
Yep. All right. Michelle, can you go to the next slide and I'll talk about mine and then we'll answer. There's a couple questions that Yolanda just sent to me that we'll answer after I go through this slide. So basically, like people were talking about, Charity mentioned positionality. For me, I always start my first unit in any classroom that I've ever taught in. And a lot of times people are surprised, but I am kind of unique because I start out as a PE and health teacher. So a lot of times people are like, how in the world is she in CS? I just happen to be like a nerd person. Anywho, I always start my unit about identity, and I share my identity traits with all of my students, and I give them a private moment to share their whatever identity traits they're welcome or interested in sharing with me. We also give them I also give them a platform on this sheet to tell me the pronouns they would like to be going by. Because a lot of times people don't take that initiative or take that intentional step in a classroom, and you automatically do not allow certain students to feel safe by just asking what pronouns you want them to use. I'll tell you, for this school year, it's the first time I had a trans boy in my classroom. And the only reason that I found out that this student was a trans boy was because the student came up to me and said, Coach White, you're the only person that seems to get it. I have not gone to the bathroom the entire school year. I hold my bladder till I get home. And I said, excuse me? I really thought they were making it up, and looked into their eyes and realized they weren't. And I literally stopped class because we were like working independently on something at that point. I literally stopped class and called for an administrator in the middle of my class and said, this young man does not have access to a bathroom, and that is problematic. So what are we going to do about it? And of course, administration always comes up with, we didn't know, yada, 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 da, 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 da. I continue to press. That's great. You know now, what are you going to do about it?
Mm-hmm.
Before the end of the day, that young man had the bathroom in the clinic that he could use at any time during the day to use the rest of the time that he was at school. That small step of allyship may be uncomfortable for people. For some people, for me, I'm definitely learning in the LGBTQ community. I'm definitely trying to be a great ally in that community, more so than I have ever been. And that step was uncomfortable, to sit there and press my administrators on, this child does not have a bathroom. Like, that's a basic need that's not being met for a child in public school. That's atrocious. And so understanding that your allyship sometimes has to make you go front and center and put your words and your body on the line for things that you know are right and just. And a lot of times people don't want to do that. And that's why it doesn't stop me when people get upset about what I tweet and then I get a reprimand, because I know I'm not saying anything that's false. I'm not spreading fake news, as we want to coin it now. I'm not lying about anything. And that's a part of being a good ally, is whatever privileges that I have the privilege of being a heterosexual female. I have to leverage that privilege to be an ally for people that are trans, that are not heterosexual, that are homosexual, that are asexual, that are bisexual. I have to leverage my privilege, and leveraging your privilege means your words and your actions, and sometimes your body have to go on the line. And a lot of times people are not willing to do that because they are selfish, and that's okay. You're not ready for the allyship level of playing in the justice movement, but understand it requires sacrifice from those who are privileged. And a lot of times people don't want to relinquish that sacrifice.
Absolutely.
Yes. And understand, like, as it says on the slide, I did not relent. I made sure that they got a bathroom for that young man before they left my classroom. So they're thinking it's like an emergency. And I never page, because I never have fights in my classroom or anything. So they knew it was serious if I was paging for them to come. When they came and then they saw that's what I was talking about, they were like, "Are you serious?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm deadly serious. That's why I called you. It was an emergency. This child has not gone to the bathroom. This is October, and this child has not gone to the bathroom in the school, this entire school year. That's very problematic." So understand that you have to wait and continue to push until you get an answer.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be content to just say, "I want to make sure you're aware of this." And then I could have easily just said, "Let the administration go." When she said, "Oh, well, we weren't aware that he was trans and da 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 da." And I said, "Great, you're aware now. What are you going to do?" And it took calling the counselor, calling the head principal of the school to make the bathroom available for the student. So make sure that you understand, when you really want to be an ally for somebody, or accomplice or co-conspirator, it requires you to leverage your privilege, and it requires sacrificing your privilege. And a lot of times those are the things that we're not comfortable doing, but we have to do in order to move the justice needle for those people who are marginalized.
Absolutely. I do want to piggyback on that for just a brief moment. I do want to make sure that every single person on this thread is aware that we all have at least one facet of privilege that we can leverage to the benefit, to the advantage of our students. You're an adult. That means that inherently you have access to certain privileges, you're entitled to certain rights. You have the right to vote. You have the right to have an apartment. You have the right to purchase a car. You have all of these rights. You can rent a car and not be charged extra for it. Like, we have so many things that we can leverage that there really is no excuse why we can't advocate for our students in a way that is beneficial to them in non-harmful ways, but we can also have conversations on their behalf, and not just for them as an ally would, but as a co-conspirator. If you're going to also then bring the young person into the conversation with you, that is so much more impactful than anything else that we could do for our young people right now, particularly in our current context.
All right, Michelle and Charity, I'm going to read the first question. And I'll let y'all answer because I've talked enough and I'm kind of tired. So somebody asked what the definition of whiteness means in the sense of, does it refer to the concept of white culture or white skin color? I have an answer, but I'm gonna let y'all take it. Michelle.
Yes, ma'am. My current
It's on you.
Yes. My current understanding of whiteness is more of a cultural understanding as opposed to a skin color, because you might not have skin that is white, but you'll still have a culture of whiteness within you. And this past year, that has been my most deep learning, is that I have a high proximity to whiteness as an Asian American woman with two parents who identify as different types of Chinese American. And I just find that to be a very hard thing to explain.
Yeah.
Can I pass it on for right now? I just
Yeah,
want to say that it's a culture. That's how can we talk about white supremacy culture. It's the beliefs, it's the actions, it's the what's considered normal that is considered the dominant culture of whiteness.
Yep, that's pretty much it. I mean, just to piggyback off Michelle, it's what I said earlier. Whiteness is basically the belief that white, cis, hetero, Christian, neurotypical, able-bodied, financially secure males are considered the norm or the default. Anything outside of that is not considered norm or default and is automatically going to be marginalized. Mm-hmm. So understand, you might have proximity to whiteness, that you might be a white female. So you can experience whiteness because of your race, but then you also feel the effects of maybe patriarchy or sexism. Understand, like Charity mentioned about leveraging your privilege. You might be a white male, but you may not be heterosexual. That is going to affect your proximity to whiteness in that arena. Mm-hmm. So understand, whiteness means that there's a default setting that our society has placed as what is normal, and anything that's outside of that normal is going to be marginalized or treated differently. So hopefully, Brandon, that answers your question. The other question was, what suggestions do you have for white teachers to be effective anti-racist educators and advocates, especially when they're working primarily with students of color?
Can we ask that question one more time?
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you.
All right. How can you both speak on how white teachers can be effective anti-racist educators and advocates, especially in the context where the students they work with are primarily of color?
Okay. I'm going to tell you one thing that is bothering me about white teachers right now. Not all of the white teachers, but a lot of the white teachers. Please do not ask me, just because I'm Black, to have conversations in your schools about equity. That is a job that multiple people can do, and I don't think that it's fair that even when we look at these boards of corporations where you have a director of diversity and inclusion, and it's almost always a person that is darker complected. I don't understand that for me. Oh, see, my white friend, that's Jessica. She commented there. We, as white teachers, we cannot just look to our Black and brown colleagues to speak up for these students. We must be there doing that work. See, I see where all over. She got me. But that is legitimately a concern that I have, that we're adding to the burden of our teachers of color. Because we already have the invisible tax that we're fighting against, where we're called into conversations to be the honorary dean, to be the counselor, to be the social worker, to be the person to be auntie, to be honorary guardian in the building, just because, oh, well, she relates to the Black kids, so we'll let her take that on. So I'm already doing work that I'm not getting paid for. right? And so then you come in addition to all of that the honorary titles that come with what it means to be a teacher. We have so many other roles that we play as teachers. And I don't want to downplay that. But in addition to those roles, now I'm also responsible for making everybody else in the building act woke. That's not fair. Especially since I am being most, out of every other intersectionality conversation that I'll have, I have to remind people that computer science education isn't actually built for me, much less is it built for my students. So please don't ask me to have additional conversations about why George Floyd's murder is so impactful to our community, about what racism in schools actually looks like, about how I can help you to get rid of your implicit bias. I'm gonna just tell you to Google some stuff, because right now I'm already dealing with my own grief and my own trauma and my own exhaustion at the hands of whiteness. I don't feel like it's fair for me to have to educate somebody else on their whiteness about why whiteness is a thing. That's my personal kind of taking a step back for now. Normally, I am very much charitable and going to give you all the help and the support, and I don't have it right now for reasons that I hope are completely understandable. I don't have it, and I'm going to hold my white colleagues accountable for figuring it out. Just like this Black woman has to figure out everything. If the Black woman don't do it, it don't get done. Girl, right. That is the story of my life. I'm not going, sorry, that's where I'm gonna have to draw the line. I'm gonna have to hold you accountable for your own education on that one.
Yep. The only other things that I would suggest, just because they annoy me, is don't think like speaking AAVE or rapping in your classroom or dancing or cool handshakes makes you culturally relevant, responsive as a white educator with kids of color.
But we still
that annoys me to tell. Yeah, there's people that still, there's somebody just came out with a book, How to Teach Your Class Off, and it's about rapping in class. Anyways, anywho, I don't want to plug that book. Anyways, understanding as a white teacher, by default, it's very hard for you to decenter whiteness because that's how you've lived. You've lived as being the default or the norm. And so decentering whiteness has got to be an active decision that you make every moment that you walk into that classroom space. I would say, even if you don't have kids of color, it's important to decenter whiteness. And I think that's one of the things that we that people are missing. The big point is that there's not, people get surprised when I tell them this, and I know other people do as well. The United States is only 13% African-American or Black. Like 13%. People think that like there's 75% Black people in this country. There's not. There's more white people in this country, okay, right now. And a lot of times we aren't educating our white students to understand how to decenter whiteness. So they automatically grow up with privilege and understanding that they're the default and have not seen or heard anything outside of that. So we turn them loose in the world at 18. And all they know is white is right. I am the default. I am the norm. And it's, okay, 1 minute remaining. Thank you. And so that's also on teachers to understand that a lot of times teachers say, oh, well, it's not, I don't have to be culturally responsive because I have all white students. It's actually imperative for you to be more culturally responsive in your classroom. Mm-hmm. As Charity mentioned, you are bringing in cultures that are not in your room. Okay, responsive is I'm responding to who's in my room. Relevant, I bring in cultures that are not in my room. And it's imperative for more white teachers to do that. I would suggest, just as a white teacher, to be yourself, to decenter whiteness, to actively show that you are a co-conspirator in being anti-racist, and listen to your students. A lot of times kids of color are rarely heard in classrooms, giving them space to actually be heard and actually listening to them and actually implementing things that they're asking for. Because it's one thing to just listen to them, but if you actually like try to start doing some of the things that they know will be helpful or beneficial for them, then that makes a huge difference too.
I think I speak for the entire audience when I just say, amen. Amen. I don't think there's much else that can be said after this, except I want to hear more. And I know that the time is going to cut off, but you guys were absolutely awesome. I'm getting all of the comments in the chats. We're getting the links. Thank you so much for being a part of this. This is awesome.
Thank you all. Thank you so much
you
for
all.
coming today. We appreciate
And
it.
everybody's trying to get their comments in before time cuts out. I'm going to leave it up as long as I can, but if it cuts off,
I hope it saves.